Welcome back, everybody, to Brew Pod Between the Lines podcast. This is your host, Caden Nadsett. An excellent Father's Day this weekend to watch some Brewers baseball. Had some very exciting games to catch this weekend against the Cincinnati Reds. Myself, I was able to get out, have another cookout on Saturday evening. A little bit of iffy weather for the most part, but looks like the start of this week we're going to see some warmer weather. Looks like we're going to see some additional rain here later this week. But overall, weather was pretty nice, especially today here for Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Hopefully you guys were able to have an enjoyable day there on Sunday. But yeah, it looks like we're going to have some more rain this week. Looks like it's going to warm up a little bit here the first couple days, and actually has me a little bit worried as far as what kind of weather we might actually end up seeing, thinking that with some of those warm fronts, sometimes when those warm fronts and those cold fronts meet and you have those big changes in temperatures, it seems like some of those gnarly storms can end up coming your way. So hopefully we don't end up having too much of that. Going to keep an eye on. I think it looks like there's maybe some severe weather here moving in later today, through the night, and then into the morning tomorrow and through the day as well. So yeah, we're gonna keep an eye on it, see what happens. But hopefully, like I said, I hope everybody was able to get out, enjoy some of the nice weather this weekend. Not sure if some of you guys had baseball tournaments or soccer tournaments or camping or whatever it may be. Got up north for the weekend and just hopefully enjoyed the weather as much as you could and got some exposure to the outdoors and enjoyed what we could there. So, but yeah, back to baseball. I think we saw some really good things this weekend. I think there was obviously some things. Brewers probably seemed like they were right there to get a sweep here this series. That Friday game, really just kind of a wonky game all through. We're going to dive into a little bit of what happened in that one, of course, and talk about that. Saturday, obviously, saw a pretty nice game. Brewers bounced back, got that victory 3-1 in that game. And then here to finish up here on Father's Day, ended up another nail-biter, of course. Coming down to the end, Brewers end up winning that one 5-4. For those of you that are out there keeping tabs on what's happening in the basketball world, Mavs ended up winning Game 4 in a blowout victory against Dallas on, I believe that was Friday night in Dallas. So got that big Game 4 blowout victory for the Mavericks, which forced a Game 5, which will head back to Boston. That looks like that's going to be Monday night. And then we'll see from there if we end up having a Game 6, which realistically I think obviously going to be a tough Game 5 for the Mavericks and Luka and Kyrie, but I think if they're able to pull out a victory in this one, which actually, personally, I'm rooting on their end. I've never really been too much of a fan of the Boston franchise. I like Jaylen Brown a lot, not too much of a fan of Jason Tatum, at least. I am to some extent, but I also feel that he's gotten a lot of, since his upbringing, I think he's gotten talked about quite a bit, and I think Jaylen Brown and some of the other guys kind of get left in his shadows. But I think he's still a very good player. Obviously, they have a fantastic team, only one game away from winning the finals. But I'm kind of pulling for the Mavericks to win Game 5. Going to be interesting to see what ends up coming to that. And I think what I was going back to what I was saying, I think if the Mavericks are able to pull out a Game 5 victory, I think it gets a little bit dicey. I think the Mavericks have a real shot. You won Game 4 and Game 5, which when you're down 3-0, those are going to be the two toughest games to get. Game 6, you'd be heading back into Dallas at home, with the momentum big time, and then Game 7, if that was to happen, would be pretty crazy to see Dallas even have a chance to potentially come back after being down 3-0. So definitely a lot of fun watching those games. Haven't been quite as exciting, actually, really since the conference final series on both the Eastern and Western side. Obviously, Celtics ended up sweeping the Pacers, and then Mavericks ended up winning that series in 5. So it seems like the series leading up to that, before that, were actually a lot more exciting. It seems like we've actually had more blowout victories that we've seen here since we got to those conference finals, which typically are a lot of the more closer, hard-fought games that you see. But I think it's been a lot of fun. WNBA is really kicking into gear here. They're, I think, almost a month now through the season. And I ended up getting a little of a glimpse of the Chicago Sky versus the Indiana Fever game. Today, Caitlin Clark seemed to have a pretty good game. Didn't end up getting to watch the end. But I did have a chance to watch that replay of the Angel Reese flagrant 1 foul on Caitlin Clark. And that kind of brings up an interesting topic. I think Caitlin Clark has gotten a lot of bad rap Not so much from the fan base, but more so from the players that are in the WNBA. I don't know if they don't think that she has, earned her right as much. I think she obviously got praised a whole lot and is really upbringing the just the spectatorship of women's basketball, which is really good for the sport. I'm a big proponent of that, and I think it's really good for the sport and is very exciting to watch. But it's just amazing to me how many fouls have occurred against Caitlin Clark and how much of a bad rap she's gotten from some of the other players. And as much as I don't think Reese intentionally caused the flagrant one foul, I mean, it still was contact to the head and neck area, and pretty harshly as well. Clipped her pretty well on the head when she was going in for a layup there. But just interesting to see that Caitlin Clark is having such a hard time. Not so much in the way she's performed. I think we've already seen some really good growth from her. She had a lot of poor offensive issues with turnovers and whatnot at the beginning, but we've seen her kind of eliminate some of that and make some better decisions, keeping her dribble alive, which is causing a big help with that from that standpoint. But it's definitely been interesting to see how many fouls and how she's been covered and how she's been guarded, and does definitely have the respect based on how she's being guarded from some of the other players for her game. But at the same time, just a lot of physicality and just kind of a new thing for her from what she saw in college versus the WNBA. So, but that's been a lot of fun to watch. If you guys haven't tuned into any of those games, I highly recommend that. They're very competitive, a lot of fun things to watch on both ends of the ball, and just think that's been a lot of fun, and just glad that that's been a big addition for, like I said, spectatorship for women's basketball, and I think it's a great thing for the sport of basketball in general. So, yeah, if you guys are catching any of those games, not sure how many of you out there listening have really been keeping tabs on any of that, but in case you haven't and you feel like you would want to, that's just kind of what we're looking at with some of that stuff going else on in some of the other sports categories. But with that, we'll kind of bounce back to Brewers Reds from this weekend, Father's Day weekend. Starting with Friday, we saw Freddie Peralta get the start on the bump for the Milwaukee Brewers, and once again, really gets kind of roughed up. And this is now, I believe, 3 starts in a row where we've probably seen some of the worst, at least this season, that we've seen from Freddie Peralta. I know he had that really good start against the Chicago Cubs where he recorded those 11 strikeouts, but ever since then, it just seems like his focus, maybe his demeanor on the pitching mound just doesn't quite seem. It seems like something's not quite right there. In this one, he gives up 6 earned runs on 10 hits and only goes 5 1/3 innings pitched. And I think the question right now is, what is the answer for Freddie? I think the question is, he's supposed to be our ace. He's supposed to be trying to fill the shoes of Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, both of those guys, which Brandon Woodruff obviously being out, Corbin Burns no longer on the team. And I think there's a couple things that come into my mind. It's, I think there's a lot of pressure on Freddie Peralta, especially with how many injuries we've seen on the starting rotation, right? There's been now 12 different starting pitchers for the Milwaukee Brewers, and that's a lot of different things and a lot of different moves to cover on the roster. So Freddie right now feels like, I think, that he's kind of holding together the starting rotation. I'm assuming that's kind of what burden he has on him right now. And he's still definitely a young pitcher, still adapting to a lot of things. And we have seen this struggle in him during the middle of the season from him, where he usually starts off pretty hot, ends up going into a little bit of a struggle bus, and then usually tailing up towards the back end of the season. At least last year, heading into the playoffs, he was arguably our best starter heading into that playoff run. But I think that's what it all comes back to, is right now, what is the answer for Freddie? Like I said, I think part of it has to do with the pressure on him. I think a lot of it also has to do probably with just the mentality and his confidence. I know I spent some time talking about that in the last episode. I think he's pressing a little bit too hard. He's definitely missing his spots pretty marginally at the moment. And then I think a lot of it comes down to not only do the hitters recognize his struggles, I think locating with the off-speed pitches it seems to be the most thing. I think he's done a really nice job with the changeup, but I think the slider curveball, he's having some trouble with locating it down and away. I think he's throwing it too much off the plate when starting off the plate, that it's not very competitive to the hitters. I think it's too far outside or off the plate that when it starts to break, it's basically already a ball. It needs to start more over the middle of the plate, kind of dive down across outside or inside to a left-handed hitter if, based on whatever variation of hitter he's facing, based on what side of the plate they're on. But I think that's the big thing. I think they're kind of sitting fastball for the most part. I think that's where a lot of these hits are coming from. And then obviously that location. But I think the fact that he's not really able to land that off-speed pitch for strikes consistently, besides the changeup, he's been pretty consistent with that one for the most part. But again, I think a lot of it has to come down to that, some of those marginal misses. And then it all comes back to, I think, that mentality and the confidence level for Freddie Peralta. Right now, his confidence level, I can't imagine, is too high. And hopefully with some work, in the bullpen sessions coming up here before his next start, working with William Contreras, working with some of the training staff to try and fix some of these things, I do for sure see a comeback for Freddie Peralta. I think he's a very good pitcher. He's got MLB stuff. We know that. And it's not a velocity problem this year. His velocity is actually upticked from where it's been on average over the last couple seasons. So it's definitely not a velocity issue or a fatigue issue of any sorts. But I think right now it just comes back to location, kind of having that confidence and confidence in all of his pitches. Because obviously when he got called up was mainly just a fastball slider pitcher. But since has developed the curveball, changeup, and if he can get all four of those pitches working for him, he can definitely be and has shown stints of a Cy Young type pitcher. So hopefully he's able to get back to the roots of what he's been best at throughout his career, and we can get back to him being our ace and displaying some of that consistent good pitching that we've seen so far, at least in the beginning of the season, first couple months that we saw of this year. But kind of going back to this game Friday, there was another couple of things that were just completely wild in this game. We saw the Reds commit 5 errors in this one, 3 by Elly De La Cruz and 2 by Candelario for the Reds. All 5 of those errors coming on the infield, couple of throwing errors, a few fielding errors as well. But I don't know how many games that I've seen. Reds ended up winning this one 6-5, but I don't think I've seen many games where a team commits more than 3 errors and still wins the ball game. I think there has to be a lot of things that go right, that go your way for a team to still come out on top when you're committing that many errors. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. The Brewers' offense was really the Achilles heel in the game for them. They just went 1 for 16 hitting with runners in scoring position. That was kind of the story of the series against the Toronto Blue Jays, carried in through the rest of this homestand against the Reds. We'll talk about that here towards the end, dive into the total numbers for the series. But I think that it was just wild to me. The fact that the Reds committed 5 errors but still led this entire game all the way through was just crazy. Brewers did have a big fight in them in the 9th inning, crazy 9th inning. Ended up getting a run. Jackson Chourio gets a base hit, brings in the 5th run of the game. Jake Bauers gets thrown out at home, which would have been the game-tying run at that point. And I think there's a couple things from that I took away. I think obviously Jake Bauers came in to pinch run for Rhys Hoskins, which is definitely a better option. Obviously, Jake Bauers is still not one of our best runners on the team by far, but I think I just don't see in this scenario. I do understand going back, looking at the numbers, 1 for 16 with runners in scoring position, but I just don't think sending him in this scenario was necessarily the right idea. You've got Alexis Diaz for the Cincinnati Reds on the ropes. He had definitely been struggling, had already walked a couple batters. Brewers had gotten some pretty good contact off of him. And Jackson Chourio did a nice job, beautiful approach to go to right field. Got that 5th run in, and the go-ahead run came in. I think it was too much of a line drive. I think it was just a little bit too much of a risk by Jason Lane to send him at third base. But like I said, looking at the runners in scoring positions numbers at the end of the game, I do understand why he was in desperation to try and get that tying run in. And then following that, just kind of a wild play. We saw Blake Perkins ended up squaring around to bunt. And I really don't think that he had a bad idea. I think he's been so good at doing this year and kind of trying to catch the defense off guard. But I also think that it caught, I can't recall exactly who was on third base at that time, which would have been the game-tying run. But I think even they were caught a little off guard. I think it might have been Joey Ortiz maybe, can't recall exactly. But even if it was a safety squeeze situation, I don't know if it would have worked exactly because that guy on third base didn't necessarily have to commit to home plate. But for Candelario, or who, I don't remember if there was a defensive substitution made at third base for the Reds late in the game, but I think the play would have probably, if he were to have laid it down, probably would have been a better play at home than there would have been at first base, but ends up popping it up to the pitcher, ends the game, and just really kind of disheartening. And I think the Brewers definitely thought, looking at the stat sheet, that they probably could have and should have won this ball game. But nonetheless, Brewers end up losing this series opener to the Cincinnati Reds 6-5. A lot of crazy things. Mainly Freddie Peralta, I think, is the big thing for the Brewers that they need to try and work on, try and get him back to being right, as he is definitely such a crucial part to that starting rotation for the Milwaukee Brewers. Jumping into Saturday, not a ton to talk about. Saturday actually kind of a boring game for the most part. Brewers still take out the victory 3-1 after a Joey Ortiz huge 3-run home run to left center field. And then we ended up seeing Bryce Wilson had another very solid start, gives up no runs, collects 6 strikeouts through 5 1/3 innings of scoreless baseball. And Joey Ortiz continues to impress. Like I said, he hit that big 3-run home run to left center off of Andrew Abbott for the Cincinnati Reds, and we saw him hit another opposite field double in today's game. And his opposite field approach just, again, continues to amaze me. The authority that he's able to put on these baseballs to right center, right field, and opposite field just in general is just incredible. And I think that's a lot of pride to his growth that he's had in the major leagues at such a young age, and I think he's just doing some great things. But yeah, Bryce Wilson did a really nice job. Brian Hudson pitched a couple scoreless innings. He continues to be amazing, ends up getting his ERA back down below 1 on the season. And then McGill gets a little bit dicey there towards the end of the game in the 9th, ends up surrendering a run, but nonetheless escapes this one. Brewers win 3-1. So really nice game. Brewers pretty much did everything right, no errors in this one. Offense was a little bit silent for the most part, which we've seen here in the last, seems like, couple weeks now. We've seen a stretch of some Brewers baseball. Obviously had a nice breakout game against the Detroit Tigers, but for the most part it seems like the offense now has kind of cooled down, and it might be more so the pitching that's carrying some of the team right now and kind of setting us up so well for these wins. And then lastly, jumping into this Father's Day game here on Sunday, Colin Rea gets his 6th win of the year after another very solid start to follow up those 7 scoreless innings he posted against Toronto in Milwaukee. Willy Adames gets another huge go-ahead home run off the 3-run home run variety in the 6th inning. And Frankie Montas for the Cincinnati Reds had pitched a really solid game. We saw Lucas Sims come in, and on the first pitch that Willy Adames hit that go-ahead 3-run bomb. So I think Willy Adames came to the plate. He had an idea of what pitch he was going to get, and he did not miss it. I mean, he did a nice job. And again, this is that straightaway center field approach that we see from Willy Adames. And I will say time and time again, for Willy Adames, and realistically for any of the guys on this team, we see it from Yelich, we see it from Turang, we see it from Contreras, we see it from Ortiz. When guys are going right, they drive the ball to center field and opposite field. They're looking to hit the ball that way and have that kind of approach. Because when you get that hanger, in this case, which is exactly what Willy Adames got, he got a hanging slider, you're able to hit it with some authority. And if it's inside, you're able to pull on the ball. If it's a hanging, off-speed pitch on the inner half of the plate, sitting fastball and having that center field to opposite field approach allows you to pull the ball with some authority in the time where you have it. It's that silver lining between being timed up for the fastball and for the off-speed pitches all in one for the most part. And I think this is, I'll preach this from now till the day I die, especially with Willy Adames, guys, from in the future that come up, guys that we talk about. I'm sure I'll cover this so many times, is it's the most success when you have that approach to hit it to center field, opposite field, and these guys are always, and it's proof in the pudding that these guys do the best that they can or perform the best when they have that kind of mentality and that kind of approach at the plate. And Willy Adames, too. 7 of those 12 home runs this season, 6th inning or later. I mean, that's kind of a crazy stat to think. Talk about a clutch guy. I know he's been so clutch for the Brewers in the last few seasons. No matter what his stats are, whether he's struggling at the plate or whatnot, it seems like always in those later inning positions, he's been key. He's been so good. And we saw it once again today and ended up really helping and this was the big hit that pushed the Brewers to the victory, the 5-4 victory against the Cincinnati Reds, winning their 8th straight series against the Cincinnati Reds and 3 straight after beating the Tigers and the Toronto Blue Jays in back-to-back series as well. So right now, doing a nice job kind of doing what you're supposed to do. Go out there. I think that's the thing that I've always talked about. You go out there, baseball, it's a long season. You're going to have some fatigue. You're going to deal with some of that. I think setting yourself up to win each series that you play is going to be the big key, and that's exactly what they did in this one. And another really key game, or really another key point in this game, Yelich puts together a couple of key at-bats in this one. That sixth inning ended up drawing a walk that ended up taking Frankie Montas out of the game and set up Willy Adames for that big go-ahead home run. And then how about Yelich laying down a run-scoring bunt to score Turang in the seventh inning on a pull bunt. Beautiful bunt, and that brought his batting average up to a mere .333 on the season, which would be leading in the league in that category to this point, but right now actually does not end up having enough at-bats to qualify him after that long IL stint. But I think right now, Luis Arias of... Who does he play for? I think he plays for the San Diego Padres, who the Brewers actually face coming up here. I know he was with the Miami Marlins, and then he was with the Minnesota Twins for a stint, and I forget, there was just a trade. I think he is on the San Diego Padres now. I might actually have to take a look at that. But I think he's on the San Diego Padres. He won the hitting title a couple times, or at least one time here, either last season or the year before when he was on kind of the 400 batting average chase for a while. But he's hitting .327 right now, so Yelich would be just a bit above that as of right now, but like I said, does not have enough ABs to qualify him for that category for leading the league right now. And then another wild one, Blake Perkins makes a walk-off. I like to consider it a walk-off, even though technically, realistically, you can't have what they quote-unquote call a walk-off. But I call it a walk-off winning throw to end the game and cuts down Stuart Fairchild at the plate. And a heck of a play from Blake Perkins. We saw Trevor McGill once again get a little dicey in that last inning. We saw Elly De La Cruz have another incredible game here in this one. Offensively, just continues to amaze with his athleticism. And it's as exciting as it is for me to watch him. And I love watching these guys that perform. But at the same time, it's like every time he's at the plate, it's like, geez, can we just get past this guy, please, and keep him off the bases? Because as soon as he gets on the bases, it puts everybody else on edge, including the spectators there at home. And he's just such a fun guy to watch and has been an amazing addition to the MLB. And kudos to him for continuing to succeed. And I know there was a lot of times that they listed today, the announcers for the Brewers specifically, that announced his strikeout numbers being an issue, which they have been. He is currently leading the league in strikeouts in that category. But the guy's only 22 years old. He's only got something to look up to from here. He's got 11 home runs, now 12 on the season after today, and leading the league in stolen bases after today, which he has been since the last few weeks, and continues to just put on a clinic on the base paths every time he reaches. So I think he's only going to get better, and he's only going to get more dangerous the more consistency he has in games, the more things that he learns on a day-in, day-out basis, the more familiar that he gets with the playing field in the MLB. And he just continues to amaze. But like I said, Trevor McGill gets a little dicey in the ninth inning, ends up walking Elly De La Cruz intentionally. Interesting decision there by Pat Murphy. But understandably so, with Candelario getting pulled out of the game, with Santiago Espinal coming up to bat, gets a base hit up the middle, and like I said, Blake Perkins makes an incredible throw, beats him by a few steps, and William Contreras took a little bit of a brunt of a hit, ended up kind of getting clipped in the head by Stuart Fairchild trying to run through. No intent to harm or anything like that. Just ended up being a bang-bang play at home. Just Stuart Fairchild trying to get in there to score. William Contreras trying to make a play to tag him out. Luckily, ended up holding on to the ball. Actually, after watching it, kind of amazed that he was able to hold on to the ball, but ended up reviewing no, worries of blocking the plate or anything like that. Did land the tag successfully, and Brewers ended up winning this one 5-4, like I stated. But, man, this series was one that made you sitting on the edge of your seat pretty much the whole time. I didn't end up really getting a ton of time to watch Saturday's game, but got a chance to watch the game on Friday at home, got a chance to watch the game today here with a bunch of people as well, and it makes it exciting. I was actually watching the game both Friday and Sunday on Father's Day with some Reds fans as well. That makes it a little bit more competitive in the room for sure. You get a little bit of chipping back and forth, which makes it fun. But at the same time, I even said to somebody that I was watching with on Friday, even happened to look over and say, I really don't like the fact that we're both rooting against each other in this situation. In that ninth inning, it was getting really dicey. I think both of us were kind of biting our nails, really anxious to see what was going to happen. I think our stress levels were through the roof. But it was a lot of fun at the end of it all, and it's always fun to have that competitive atmosphere with some of the people that you're very close to, and it was a very exciting weekend and a lot of fun baseball to watch. So, like I said, crazy weekend, crazy baseball. Brewers do get away on the weekend with another series victory, which at the end of the weekend, that's all you can look for. Like I said, seemed like they were so close to getting that series sweep against the Cincinnati Reds, but they've played some really good baseball here as of late, specifically against the Cincinnati Reds going back for the past few years now, and just continue to pull out victories in these close games. So another thing that I wanted to talk about, kind of moving on from all the things that we saw this weekend, just wanted to touch on a couple of really important topics I think that have stood out to me here recently. I did just learn today Brewers are tied currently for the second best fielding percentage in the league at .988, tied for, did I say second? Tied for best fielding percentage, .988. I think the Braves, Diamondbacks, I think there might have been a couple more teams that were basically at the same margin. I don't know if there's some more decimals following that maybe the Braves do actually rank above us. Because when I look at the spreadsheet and I look at everything, the Braves technically were above us, but that could also be just alphabetical as they go BRA and we go BRE. I don't know if that's a difference there or not, or if we're technically tied for first place, but I will preach this as well. This is another thing that I'll talk about, and I think this realistically applies to any team sport for the most part. Defense wins games, and I don't care, like I said, if you're talking about basketball, if you're talking about football, if you're talking about baseball, I think it's all the same, that defense wins games. I just think it's in different fashions, right? I think basketball, you're playing more of, the styles are way different. Football, the communication and whatnot, the coverages of what happens on the field is very important. Knowing, kind of predicting the routes that they're going to run, watching the eyes of the quarterback. Same with defense on basketball, though. You've got kind of a similar thing. I mean, all these teams go out, and when the defense performs, more often than not, your team's going to win. And that's what we've seen from the Milwaukee Brewers, and the stats show to it. They're ninth currently in the league in runs scored, defensive runs saved at 24. And a lot of that comes from these guys, these Gold Glove candidates that we have on our team. There's so many of them, I think, at this point in the season. Brice Turang, I think, runner-up in the Gold Glove for second baseman last year. I think right now there's no doubt in my mind that he's deserving of that second base Gold Glove. Joey Ortiz, talked about this guy a lot. After a little bit of that rough week or so to begin the season, he's really picked it up and has played a great defensive third baseman, let alone to talk about these guys' offensive numbers. Both Turang and Ortiz have just been on burners. But Willy Adames, I think he's always putting together a really solid shortstop. Sal Frelick plays an incredible outfield no matter where you put him, whether it be center field, right field, which is primarily the two places that we've seen him, not too much left field that we've seen from him. And then Blake Perkins, of course. This guy has come out of nowhere for the most part on this Brewers roster, and it's amazing how easy he makes things look. Between him, Sal Frelick, Jackson Chourio started to make some impressive catches, and I think he's been increasing his ability there in the outfield defensively as well, which was mainly the big thing in his issue in his game so far. But it's been incredible. I think the fact that the Brewers have been so good defensively, they ended up getting the Gold Glove for team rating last year in 2023. We're the best defensive team last year in 2023, and I think we're seeing a lot of that same in 2024. Obviously, a lot of the guys that were big in helping us win that Gold Glove as a team last year, I think a lot of those are returning. We have Brice Turang again. We've got Willy Adames, Sal Frelick. Blake Perkins was definitely in there last year, kind of back and forth, but I don't think that he made at least so much of a defensive impact as we've seen him make this year. And I think we saw some displays of it. I think we definitely saw some games where he displayed some really good defensive play, but it's definitely been a lot more obvious and a lot more visual here this season that we've seen from Blake Perkins. And like I said, I'm going to go back to this. I really do think that defense wins games, especially in close games like this. Now, regardless, not looking at the stat sheet from today, but Brewers did end up committing 3 errors in this one, which cost the Reds a lot of their runs. Obviously, Friday's game with the Reds getting 5 errors obviously doesn't necessarily speak to this what I'm preaching right now. It's not speaking to that the defense wins games, because obviously Friday you had the worst defense, or the worst of the 2 defenses win the game, and then today the worst of the 2 defenses win today's game as well. But it's just been incredible. And I think the defense, especially when you get into the playoffs, I think you need to have guys that make these defensive runs, save plays. It brings me back to last year. Evan Longoria made that leaping catch to rob Tyrone Taylor of what would have been at least a tying, if not a go-ahead base hit that he ended up doubling off Willy Adames at second, ending that inning. If Tyrone Taylor gets a base hit there and that ball gets all the way to the corner, which looks like is what it was destined for, that scores at least 2, if not 3 runs, and you might be talking about a completely different outcome. Brewers, you talk about going on, they take the lead right there, they end up going on, winning that game. Diamondbacks come into the second game of the series in Milwaukee, down 1-0. That right there could have been your mentality, could have been completely changed and shifted. You could have had a completely different, just a whole momentum switch of that series in that game 1. And that game 1 in a 3-game series being so pivotal, because as soon as you win game 1, instantly the other team has just a buttload of pressure on them, having to be forced to win the next 2 games to even have, to have the ability to advance to the NLDS. Or ALDS, whatever it may be, but whatever side you're on. But making a defensive play like that does win games. And whether it's in the first inning, whether it's in the second inning, third inning, those plays come back to make a huge difference. I mean, there's been so many times where Brewers end up winning these games, especially the Brewers. They win these games, by 1-2 runs so consistently, and we see it time after time. And you could go back to any of these plays. A lot of times I know Bill Schroeder talks about circling the plays on the scorebook when he sees these key plays, these diving plays. You circle them on the scorebook, come back to them later, and it would be amazing just to see how many of those early inning plays you see from the Milwaukee Brewers that make such a big difference. And it really is pretty incredible. So I will preach that. Again, this is another thing that I'll basically preach. A good defense is really kind of, I think, a stability of what your team's going to be. Without a good defense, I don't think there's really any way that you're going to be much of a conversation. You can be a mediocre defense. You can be more of the top-tier defenses in the league. But if you're in the bottom, 5 or 10 teams of defense rating in the league, chances are you're probably not going to make a very far postseason run, if even make the postseason at all. So I think this speaks a lot to what Pat Murphy praises to the guys in the dugout to perform every day. But I think this is just a big thing and a big structural thing for the Brewers team, and what allows them to win these close games. Like I said, you go back to these plays that can be so pivotal that you don't even realize, and it's amazing. These guys do such a nice job of playing defense and collecting the big outs in the big moments, and we saw plenty of that today in today's game and throughout the weekend. Blake Perkins made an incredible catch on Jonathan India's rocket 109 miles an hour to center field, which I thought for sure was going to tie the game. Sal Frelick made a really nice diving catch. Jackson Chourio made a couple of leaping catches here this weekend, and there's just been a lot of good defense. Brice Turang continues to do what he does. Joey Ortiz continues to play a really sound third base as well. So a lot of fun things to watch on this team defensively. It feels like, especially for the pitching too, that's definitely a big confidence booster for the pitcher as well. You know that you don't have to be so perfect with your pitches. You can be okay having the hitters put these balls in play and know and trust your defense is going to make the play behind you. And it's amazing how much of a difference that makes in terms of being able to win these games. So I think that's definitely a big thing defensively. Lastly, here before we take off here and move on and let you guys go enjoy the rest of your day or whatever it is you're doing this week, Brewers did end this weekend. They went 5 for 31 with runners in scoring position. A lot of that coming from that 1 for 16 game on Friday's game. But I think the big question is obviously, how do we fix this issue? We saw some of this cost some of the Brewers in that Toronto Blue Jays series. Luckily, Brewers have still been able to squeak out these victories, but these games wouldn't be so close if the Brewers were able to collect some of these big hits with runners in scoring position. Rather than posting 3 to 4, 5 runs in a game, you're talking about 7, 8, or 9 runs consistently, and you're talking about you're able to throw the back end of your bullpen, or I guess the front end of your bullpen, throw in your guys that, are just basically eating innings at that point. Jared Koenig, I guess, is kind of a guy like that, ended up getting put in a pivotal position this weekend. But just some of these other guys that we like to throw out for multiple innings. Maybe Hobie Milner right now having some struggles out of the bullpen. Maybe you throw him in there for a couple innings, try and get him to find his ways back. But I think to fix this issue, there's no obviously clear-cut answer how to fix this issue, right? I think it's a process of how, and a lot of it, again, comes back to the approach that you have at home plate. And we saw some of this, I think, from Jackson Chourio today. Brewers had already taken the lead, got a couple more runners on, looking to add on, and first pitch swinging fastball up in the zone, and he takes a hack, and no doubt that he was swinging for the downs. He was swinging for the fences, trying to get another 3-run home run, kind of space the game away, put the game out of arm's reach at that point, potentially for the Reds. But I don't think that's really the approach that I like to see. I like to see the short swings, trying to get the barrel to ball, just trying to put the ball in play, especially when you got a guy on third base with nobody out or one out, whatever it may be, just trying to look to put the ball in play, maybe find a hole on the infield, or even just let the defense work. Make the defense make the play. Because I think more oftentimes than not, if you put the ball in play consistently and don't strike out in these key pivotal moments or pop out to the infield, more oftentimes than not, making those throws to home plate and making those, whether it's from the infield or outfield, puts a lot more stress on those guys too. And I think more often than not, we see runners score off of plays like that. So I think that's the big thing. I think it comes back to the mentality, the approach, and obviously these players, when they go up there knowing that, geez, we're hitting one for, at that point, 1 for 14, 1 for 15 with runners in scoring position, all you're telling yourself, and I kind of come back to this golf analogy that I like to make, you tell yourself, don't strike out. Well, when you tell yourself something like that, you're setting your mental space up to strike out. When you're saying, what you need to be saying is, okay, let's just try and get a sac fly. Let's just try. I think that main thing is just that mentality. I think it's the approach from this offense and what they're trying to do. Not trying to do too much. Just want to keep it simple. Try and bloop one into the outfield. Try and hit one over the shortstop's head, second baseman's head. Send one halfway out to outfield. Because with the speed on this team, we know, a lot of Brewers fans know, I know, that more often than not, these guys are going to score. We saw Brice Turang score on a mediocre sac fly by Willy Adames in that Toronto Blue Jays series. Actually, could have even been considered a short fly ball to left field, but Brice Turang really scored with ease in that play because of the speed and the threat that he posts on the bases. So I think this is a big thing. I think there is ways to fix this. I don't think it's so much of the fact that the guys can't hit with runners in scoring position. I think it just comes back to their approach at the plate, what they're trying to do, not trying to do too much, keep it simple, barrel the ball, try and elevate the ball if you can, and I think we're going to have good results following that. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, Brewers had a couple of those huge hits with runners in scoring position, 2 of those being 3-run homers, which is huge and backbreakers to any opposing team. But I think we need to see more of this. We need to see, it's really good that the Brewers are having consistent at-bats with runners in scoring position, but we just need to see that output and actually scoring some runs consistently and at high quantities. I think we just need to see that increase as well, and I think that would actually be kind of my answer on how we fix this issue, is just more of the mental space and approach at the plate when you're going up there. But certainly easier said than done. Really easy for me to say here on this end of the baseball, just talking about what I'm thinking from a fan standpoint. So definitely easier for me to sit back here and say that, but not saying it's easy by any means, and hopefully we see some improvement on that end. So that kind of covers all the topics that I wanted to talk about. Got a chance to talk about some really interesting things that I kind of came across and noticed. Definitely some things that the Brewers need to continue to improve on, but looking ahead, going to have some West Coast baseball. Brewers end up playing in Anaheim against the Los Angeles Angels here for a 3-game series before heading to San Diego, staying in the California area to play San Diego and the Padres for a 4-game series. Luis Urias, I believe, like I said, I think he's on that team now. Big a new addition to that team, so going to be interesting to face him. Obviously, Manny Machado, Jake Cronenworth, Tatis, I think Bogarts might be injured for the season or something like that. I'd have to look at that actually again, but I think I did hear that he's on a extended injured list, at least minimally. So going to have to take a look at that, but going to be some later games here this week. That's the first time for the Brewers here this year before heading back at home. Brewers still hold a 6.5 game lead over the St. Louis Cardinals, so a really nice job for the Brewers to kind of maintain, at least at this point, maintain that big lead in the division. So that at least gives you a week's worth of games to play with at this point in the season, and hopefully they're able to extend that a little bit as we continue to approach that All-Star break. And who knows, I feel like it could be any day at this point that the Brewers reach out, make a move, try and get somebody, particularly obviously looking at the starting rotation is where we need the most help, but I'm keeping my eye out. Going to be interesting. I think we'll see Aaron Ashby kind of come up here, backing down. We're going to keep Rodriguez, it looks like, starting on Monday, and continue on the rotation from there. Myers and Peralta to finish up that series against the Los Angeles Angels. So going to be a fun series. Going to be able to see some West Coast baseball and see how the Brewers fare against those teams. So with that, Brew Pod, Between the Lines podcast is always available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other mainstream podcast sites. I can always be reached on social media using @Brew_pod on Twitter or by searching Brew Pod, Between the Lines podcast on Facebook or Instagram. Keep an eye out, you guys, on some of the weather. Looks like I said, we might be dealing with some inclement weather here this week, so be sure to keep an eye out on what the weather is in your areas. Make sure you guys stay safe in case of any inclement, possible thunderstorms, tornadoes, or whatever we may end up being. And hopefully, don't stay up too late, obviously, depending on where you guys are, wherever you may be listening to. But I'll probably not be able to quite finish all of the baseball games here this week with a lot of the 8:30, 8:45 type starts, meaning those games will honestly carry close to midnight, 11:30. You're talking 11:30, even midnight, depending on how long these games take. So it'll be interesting to see how long my body is able to keep up. I've been trying to kind of fix my sleep schedule because it's kind of been jacked up with getting up early for work. I tend to stay up pretty late in the evenings as well, so I definitely need to fix that a little bit, get some more sleep, as that'll be better for my health and mentality, of course, as well. So with that, we'll see you guys next time. Like I said, keep an eye out on that weather, and we'll talk to you soon. And of course, go Brewers.